This is Gemara in Baba Kama Daf Chav Tes, and we're holding in the bottom of Chav Ches Amid Beis. We're about 10 lines from the bottom at the two dots. Rav Yehuda Oimer, quoting Rav Yehuda in the Mishnah, which Rav Yehuda teaches us, B'miskavein chayiv. If the person holding the picture had intent, then he is chayiv. Beloy miskavein, said Rav Yehuda, you are a potter. Now, what exactly is the intent that the person has? What is the kavana? That itself is a debated point, and therefore, that's exactly where we begin today. Says the Gemara, Hechidami miskavein, what is considered kavana? Amar Rabba miskavin la'rita lamata miksefaf. What it means is that he had intent to take it off his shoulder, and as he's taking the picture down, he trips, and the cod breaks. Amarle Abaye asks Abaye mechlal de mechayiv rameir afilu nifshara. So if Rav Yehuda holds miskavin is chayiv, that means Rameir holds without miskavin is chayiv. If miskavin means to go take the jug off your shoulder, what's einay miskavin? Einay miskavin is nifshara, sounds like. It just dissolves on its own. You didn't do anything. So ask the Gemara, can it be that Rameir really holds that in such a case it's going to be chayiv? Amar lei, Rabbi responds, yeah, in machayiv hay Rameir, afilu aznai biyada, even if the ear, even if the handle of the pitcher is in his hand, he is still chayiv, meaning he did absolutely nothing wrong, he's still chayiv. So the Gemara asks, Avi is kasha, 5 lines from the bottom, chav ches beis, amai, oines uv, oines rachmana patrei, should be good old-fashioned oines, and we know that the rule is Hashem forgives oinsim, oines rachmana patrei. Dersev, where do we know that oinsim are part of the quintessential makar? Ulanayir loisasa davar, and the young girl did not do anything, and therefore she is potter. So says the Gemara, maybe v'chiteim, maybe you're going to suggest maybe the rule of oines being potter is only with regard to death. Aval nizakin chayiv. But maybe there's a fundamental difference between katala and nizakin, that when it comes to damaging, even if you damage in a scenario of oines, completely unavoidable, maybe still you're going to be chayiv. Says the Gemara, they can't be. Vatanya, 2 lines on the bottom, we learned in a brayse in Ishra Kadai, v'loi salkai, if one's pitcher broke and he did not remove it, nafal gamalai, if his camel fell, v'loi hamidai, Rameir mechayev bizakin, v'chachamim paitin, v'chachamim, excuse me, and the chachamim say, as we turn over to Chav Tes Amud Aleph, say the chachamim, pater midinei adam, v'chayev midinei shamayim. So machlekes Rameir and the chachamim, Rameir obligating, and the chachamim say that one is pater. But explains the Gemara, Chav Tes Amud Aleph, the top line, Umaidim chachamim, the chachamim miler Rameir, be'av noisakinu masai shenichan b'roshka, go you put an item on top of your roof and nafla b'roch metzina, falls down with the regular wind, ve'ziko, and it damages, chamar maskim shu chayiv. In such a scenario, say the chachamim, they agree that he is chayiv. Umayde Rameir, the Rabbanan, this is the line that we're looking for. Be'emale kankanin alagag, if someone is raising, someone is putting pitchers onto his roof, almanas linagvan, in order to dry out to the pitchers, you know, pottery items that he's drying out, and then v'nafla beruach she'enoi mitzuya, and an abnormal wind comes and blows off the kankanim, the chachamim are maskin v'zikat shu pater. So I asked the Gemara, what is going on? We wanted to suggest that the difference is that for oinsim, maybe one is only pater when it comes to death, but not when it comes to nizakin. But we see clearly that's not true. So we're trying to figure out what is shitas Rebbe Meir. Again, Rabbi Yehuda said b'miskavein, one is chayiv and miskavein pater. The Gemara suggested miskavein means to miskavein to take it off. If miskavein means take it off, that means Rabbi Meir is going to be mechayiv even if you did nothing. The pitcher just disintegrates on its own and it damages in your chayiv. Ask the Gemara why. You'll tell me that oinsim is only a potter for death. We see clearly that's not true. We see in this brisa, excuse me, the Rameir is a maida. Something falls baruch she'einoi mitsuya, which in English that means oines. They're going to be potter. So Ella Amar Abaye. So rather Abaye says a new pshat in how to learn the Mishnah. Machlekes Rameir and Rav Yehuda betarti peligi. Peligi b'shas tefila, upligi la'achar nefila. Explains Abaye, 8 lines down. First one line is pligi. Pligi b'shas tefila b'nitzkal. Paisheya. They have a machlekes as it falls. Is tripping considered a paisheya that one is obligated? Mar Savar Rav Yehuda. Mar Savar, excuse me, Tanakama, right? Rav Yehuda. No, Tanakama holds, excuse me, Nitkal paisheya. Therefore, going to be chayiv. Omar Savar Rav Yehuda holds no, Nitkal lav paisheya. Tripping is not going to obligate you. Tanakama over here is Rameir. Rameir is going to hold that you are chayiv. Rav Yehuda is going to hold you are potter. Uvenitzgal lav b'shehu pligi la'achar nefila b'mafker nizakov. It's a new machlokes. After one falls, la'achar nefila, the item on the floor damages. What's the machlokes Rameir and Rabbi Yehuda? If someone is a mafkir, if someone makes ownerless his items, Mar Savar, the Tanakama Rameir hold Marvin Azav Chayiv, Mar Savar, Potter. Asks the Gemara, Mimai, where did Abayi know that there's this dual machlokes going on in the Mishnah? Midiketani Tarti, from the fact that the Mishnah said 2 cases. What did the Mishnah say? Hochlak echad b'mayim. Hoyshalaka becharsis. Hainuhach. Says if someone slipped on the water, or if someone got damaged by the charsis, by the shards. Why do we have to say both cases? They're ostensibly the same thing. Elalav. So rather, suggesting Gemara, this is where Abaye learned the Mishnah. Hachikamar. Hochlak echad b'mayim is when b'shas nefila. Oishalaka becharsis is when lachar nefila. Omidimas nisan betarti. Period. Excuse me. So that is how Abaye is going to explain what's going on over here. That what's going on is we have a dual machlokes in the Mishnah. Again, they're arguing b'shas nefila and they're arguing la'achar nefila, and that's how Abaye comes along and explains the machlokes Rameir and Rabbi Yehuda. Continues the Gemara, Midimasni San Betarti. Now that you're explaining to me that the Mishnah has this dual machlokes, Brisa Nami Betarti, then the Brisa as well should be explained the same. The Brisa that says that if the kad breaks and Veloy Naflai Vehezika, he doesn't clean it up and it damages. So Bish Lamakada Mishkachasla. In the case, again, this is the brisa we quoted on the bottom of Amid Beis. Says the Gemara, Bishlam, I understand. When it comes to Kadoi, how it could be that there is this dual machlokes. Excuse me, the brisa we quoted on the top of right here in Amid Aleph. Excuse me, what did the brisa say? The brisa said a case of a kad. And the Brisa said a case of his camel. So says the Gemara, Bishlam, I understand. The case of Kadai makes a lot of sense. But asks the Gemara, Ela Gemalai, the case of his camel, we could have a case where one is mafker than nevela. But I asked the Gemara, Ela b'shas nefila, hey mishkachala. But b'shas nefila, where do we have such a scenario? So answers the Gemara, what's the case? Amar Avacha going to Avra b'maya. So the Gemara comes along and And the Gemara has an interesting ukimta. Says Rav Acha, about 12 lines from the bottom, the first one line is Omar. Says Rav Acha, the Avra B'Maya Derech Shira'asa Dinahara. Says Rav Acha, you're walking with your camel, but you're walking on a road that you can't see the path. Why can't you see the path? Because the path is covered over by water. And therefore, that's where the machlekes between Rameir and the Chacham is going to be whether bringing the camel to such a scenario, whether that itself is called a pshia, and therefore when the camel is going to trip, is the owner considered negligent for the mere fact that you brought your camel to a place in which you couldn't see the road? Says the Gemara, Hechi Dami, what's the case? I don't understand. You have another road and you went down this road, of course it's Pshia. Says the Gemara, you know what the case is? That the owner stumbles and falls, and then the Gamla trips over the owner. That's how we're going to have to explain the case. So says the Gemara, okay. Mafkir nizakov mahai. So Abaye is explaining what's the machlekes Tanakama and Rav Yehuda. Is b'shas nefila, is la'achar nefila. So says the Gemara, now we really have to go back. And now we have to plug this into the Mishnah, into Rav Yehuda's words of niskavin and ena miskavin. So says the Gemara, miskavin mafkir nizakov. If you're explaining that the Mishnah, the machlekes is if you're mafker nizakav, why is that called kavana? Rav Yehuda says if niskavin you're chayiv, if not you're potter. Why is that referred to by mafker nizakav? Amar Rav Yosef miskavin liskois becharsa. V'chein Amar Rav Ashi b'miskavin liskois becharsa. This explains Rav Ashi explains Rav Yosef what's going on over here. Is that he had kavana to be zoicha in the shards, in the pieces that fell, and that's where and then on the flip side is that you are mafkirit. That's going to be the way to explain the Mishnah. Rav Elazar Amar says the Gemara, a new way of explaining the machlokes and the chacham. We're not new, a little bit deeper. Rav Elazar mibishas nefila machlokes avlachar nefila mai divrei akol potter. Says Rav Elazar, they only argue during the time of the fall, but afterwards everyone knows potter. Says the Gemara, I vikar amir de mechayif. I Rameir seemingly said you're chayiv even lachar nefila. Elamai divrei akol chayiv. V'yigrabanan debati. Elamai b'shas nefila. Last line af b'shas nefila. Even b'shas nefila, kamash malon, and what's the chiddush? Rav Elazar is saying kidei Abaye, like the opinion of Abaye that we have the dual machlokes being b'shas nefila, being la'achar nefila, just like Abaye learned, and that's how Rav Elazar is explaining. Just slightly different words, but it's coming out to be the same machlokes. Continues the Gemara as we turn over to Chav Tesem base. The Rav Yochanan Amar says Rav Yochanan la'achar nefila machlokes avol b'shas nefila mai divrei kol potter. Ay, but to come Rav Yochanan lekamon loitei mamas nisan Rav Meir he. Don't explain our Mishnah's Rav Meir he. De Amar niskal poisheu mechlal. From there we can infer that according to Rav Yochanan the Rav Meir mechayiv. So how could Rav Meir say divrei kol potter? Elamai divrei kol chayiv. V'am t'kam Rav Yochanan k'man lo tema mas nisan Rav Meir damar niskal poisheu mechlal de bati Rabban. The Rabbanan argue seemingly. Elaha kamash shalon. So says the Gemara, you're right. So what's the chiddush of Rav Yochanan? The mafkir nizakav only in this such a scenario of mafkir nizakav the hacha who depati Rabbanan Toinesu, avol mafker nechasav da'alma mechayvi. Rav Yochanan is really explaining us that there's a fundamental difference between the mafker nizakav in our case and elsewhere. If you look at Rashi on the second line from the top, Rashi says mafker nizakav da'hacha is different. Why? Tetchilasai oinesu. Because in our case, really everything started with an oines. De patri rabbanan. Aval mafker nizakav da'alma kigoin sheshlichu midas. What's the regular case of mafker nizakav that he threw his item out and then he was mafker, or kiyum bar b'shasarabim mechayvi. So don't learn from our cases the other cases of mafker nechasav achikamar la'achar nefila machlekes. This is where Rav Yochanan is telling us. We're still in Rashi on the first narrow line. Koloimar. What does that mean? Hai machlekes the pligi rabbanan rameir v'rabbanan behifker nizakav la'achar nefilahu shetchilasay al yidei nefila aval al yidei hashlocha loy pligi v'loy teidig me Rav Yochanan b'shas tefila loy pligi. So Rav Yochanan's chiddush is that our case of mafker nizakav is different than the cases of mafker nizakav elsewhere. Itmar. Speaking of mafker nizakav, says the Gemara, let's go a drop deeper into a machlekes amarayim with regard to mafker nizakav. We're about 10 lines down. The first one line is nizakav. If itmar. Mafker nizakav Rav Yochanan Rav Elazar. Chadamar chayiv v'chadamar potter. Says the Gemara, Lima man v'chayiv v'meir man de potter krabanan. Says the Gemara, which of course we never like to say that the Amoraim are arguing in the same fashion that the Tanaim argued prior. Says the Gemara, no. Ali b'dirameir loy pligi. That's not a machlekes. Keep pligi. Ali b'dirabanan man de potter krabanan man de machayiv amar lecha. Ano dami afilu l'rabanan. Ad kan lo pati rabbanan ela b'mafker nechasav. But the hacha, why? As we just explained a moment ago, Rav Yochanan taught us that our mafker nizakav is different. Why? Mishum da'oinesu. Aval mafker nechasav da'alma. But in a regular case of mafker nizakav, mechayvi, we would obligate. So says the Gemara, it is not the same machlokes. Proves the Gemara testayim. Let me bring you a raya. Again, we had Rav Yochanan and Rav Elazar. We don't know which held which. The Gemara just said one holds mafker nizakav is chayev, one holds mafker nizakav is pot. We wanted to pin that machlekes and Ramir and the Chachamim. Says the Gemara, no, it's not the same machlekes Ramir and the Chachamim. Now says the Gemara, Tistayim, let's bring a raya, which is which shita. Tistayim, I'll bring you a proof. Rav Elazar, Hudamar Chayiv. I'll bring you a raya that Rav Elazar is the shita that holds chayiv. Amar Rav Elazar Misham Rav Yishmael Shnei Devarim Einon Bershusa Shalad Vasana Kasav Kilu Hein Bershusa. A famous memra of Rav Elazar Misham Rav Yishmael that what? There are two items that are really Einoi Bershusa Shaladam. Two items which are not in the possession of a person, two items are not in the possession of a person, and the Torah creates them ki'ilu. They're in your rishos. Ve'ilu hey, now what are they? Bar b'rishus harabim v'chametz misheishayis ulamayla. And chametz on Pesach. Even though chametz is really ownerless on Pesach, the Torah created as if it's in the owner's rishos, as he is, and therefore he's going to be chayiv. So what does Rav Elazar hold? Proves the Gemara. Rav Elazar seemingly holds that one is chayiv afar a bar b'rishus harabim, even though there is no owner. So seemingly Rav Elazar is going to be the one that holds mafker nizakav is going to be chayiv. Says the Gemara Tistayim, that is a good raya. Asks the Gemara on the raya, miyam Rav Elazar achi. But does Rav Elazar really hold this? V'ha'amar Rav Elazar, but we know that Rav Elazar says Ibcha, the opposite. Where do we see this? It's in the Mishnah. If someone is turning over the gull, turning over dung in a public area, and someone else is damaged by the dung, chayiv bin izakav, the one who did the act of hovchu, the one who turned it over, he is obligated. Va'amar Rav Elazar, and on this explains Rav Elazar lo shanu Allah. Sheniskavin lischos ben. The only time the one that turned them over is chayiv is if he had in mind while turning them over that he wants to be zeicha, he wants to acquire the galal, the dung. Avoloy niskavin lischos ben. Potter. Ask the Gemara, Alma Mavkin Izakov, Potter. We see he didn't have in mind to be zeicha on them. Then they are considered ownerless items. They're considered ownerless items, and they're going to be potter. Seemingly, Mafik Nitzakov is potter. Amar Ravada Barava Shechzira Limit Koiman. The reason why he's going to be potter, according to Rav is because he put the galal, the dung, back into its original place, and therefore he didn't do anything. And therefore, that's the reason why. It's not because Mafkin is Zakov. It's not considered that it's his at all. The fact that he turned them over, but then he put it back where it started, he did not do anything. Amar Ravina comes like Ravina and he explains, Mashal Ravada Barava Lama Hadavar Taimeh. What is the case of Rava comparable to Lemaitzi Bar Megula V'Cheso V'Chazar V'Gilu? What we just said is comparable to, let's say you find a bar, and the bar is uncovered, and you go and you cover up the bar, and then momentarily later you uncover it. You didn't do anything. That's the reason why in this case you're going to be potter. So over here you move the galal and then you move the back, so you're potter. Over there, over there, loy istalik lo meiser rishon. Istalik lo meiser rishon. Says the Gemara, when you covered over the pit, the meiser rishon is not undone, meaning because the pit is still there, it's just covered. And that's the reason why when you subsequently uncover it, you are not a chayiv, rather the balabar, the one who originally dug that pit, is chayiv. But in our case, when you move around the galal, is taliklu meiser rishon. By moving it, the meiser rishon is no longer there, because his item that he damaged is no longer in the place that he put it. Haloi dami, so what's this comparable to? Alamaitzi bar megula otmama, and you filled in the pit. V'chazar v'chafra, and then you redug it. That's the comparable case. Why? Because in such a case, then the original action is no longer there. And it's in his rishos afterwards. It says the Gemara. So now let's give a new pshat. Elo Amar Ravashi, a new pshat in Rav Elazar in the case of the Hovchuas Agolol. Elo Amar Ravashi. What's the reason that the guy that turns over the galal is potter, says Ravashi? Because he did it less than 3 tfachim. Therefore, it's not considered that he undid the first ma'isa of placing the galal there, and therefore he's going to be potter. Ask the Gemara 1 second. Why did Rav Elazar say such? Why didn't Rav explain? Look me lamala megimel. Vav agav the loy niskavein lischos ba'chayiv, and you still would be chayiv. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava Masni. Why didn't Rav Elazar say that? Explains Rava, and with this we conclude. Because Masnita and Kashya say Rav Elazar was bothered by the Mishnah itself. Ma'iri hafach lisnig via. It should have said you picked up the galal. Why does it say turned over? Elosh mamina. Kol hafak lamata mishleisha. Who then anytime you turn something over, it's considered pachas mishleisha, and that's the reason why Rav Elazar said the case the way that he did. We'll stop over here and we'll pick it up from continuing the conversation of Rav Elazar in the next year of Siyata Dishmaya.